it's the squid who's the real villain. In fact, Peter Lorre, who plays a very sympathetic role in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, claims that the squid got the role that's usually reserved for him. Now, to construct our squid, we had to first have a plan. So we laid out these scale drawings with the aid of technical directors and then animated its movements forward and backward. Now, the best of plans are only beginning. It's the result that counts. So now let's see that result. Let's move over on the 20,000 League set and meet this giant squid in person. Kirk Douglas will handle the introductions.
Cut it. Thank you, gentlemen. Take us down.
Rosie, how high up are the jacks?
Start gathering up the equipment for a move, boys.
Got a whale of a tale to tell you, lads. Hello. You know, this has been quite a picture for me. I've never been braver. I fight sharks, cannibals, giant squid, women. But the bravest thing I do is to open my mouth and sing. Believe me, with a voice like mine, it takes a lot of courage. Prop man. I won't break it. Always afraid I'm going to break something. You know, it's been an exciting experience here in Disneyland, where a wooden puppet called Pinocchio turns into a human. Peter Pan teaches children to fly. But my greatest thrill in this land of miracles was actually walking along the floor of the ocean with Captain Nemo and the crew of the Nautilus. Whew, what an experience. Oh, this is interesting. I want you to see this. Rosie,
Yes, Kirk.
would you mind placing that against the ship for a minute?
You bet. Over here, Marty.
You see, everything's different here. Now, every other picture I've worked in, you could tuck the script under your arm and walk home. But here, oh no. It takes two men to carry a single page. Really. Look. What you might call a king-size comic strip. After Dick, our director, lays out the action, the artist sketched the whole script with these drawings. Now, this is the squid fight that you're going to see. Oh. Quite a monster, huh? Now, just before this scene, I've been down in the glory hole.
Kirk, we're ready.
All right, I'll be right with you. I want to explain to the people. There's been a tremendous explosion.
We're lined up and waiting.
All right, I'll be right there.
We're waiting.
Clock watcher. I'm sorry, I'd like to tell you more about this, but I can't hold up production. Well, I've got an idea. Hey, Peter.
Huh?
Come over here, will you?
What is it, Kirk?
Listen, would you do me a favor? You all know Mr. Peter Lorre, a fine actor.
Yes, but I can't sing.
Uh-huh. I knew we had something in common. Listen, Pete, I've got to go over to stage 3. Would you tell these people more about the squid fight?
But I'm not in this fight. You know, I'd much rather tell them about the scene with our fight.
No,
you know,
there's
when
no
I
time
draw
for that,
back.
Peter. Mr. Disney's orders.
Oh, well, all right.
Thanks. And, I'll see you later.
But Paul, Lucas, and I, we're not in this fight. I still think I'd rather tell you about...
Peter!
All right. Well, before the giant squid attacks, there's an underwater explosion on a submarine. And because of that, the power goes off. So Captain Nemo, that's James Mason, Captain Nemo orders the submarine to surface.
It all started with Disney's early fascination with an adventure under the sea.
Walt was, he'd always liked Jules Verne, and when he got the ideas about making a picture of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, early in his career, he never could have done it.
Unless, of course, it was to be an animated feature, which was Disney's initial idea. But fate intervened with a gifted Disney sketch artist. Harper Goff, a designer-illustrator who worked directly for Disney on special projects, shared with him a passion for Jules Verne.
Walt went to England for many, many, many weeks in a row, so I just fantasized on the idea of making it a live-action film. I didn't draw it as if it was a cartoon. I just worked for the book. It was empirical. It followed every incident that was in Jules Verne original was in this version.
Goff began by drawing a few continuity sketches.
until finally I had a layer of storyboards, about 15 boards sticking out into the room of the whole show. And so when Walt came back, he just raised one eyebrow as if to say, when the cat's away, the mice will play, you know. And he said, what do you expect us to do? And I said, well, he said, this is live action, you know. I just thought you might do live action.
When Disney saw Gough's artwork, he had a moment of inspiration that would ultimately put the future of his studio and his plans for Disneyland in jeopardy. His first decision was to scrap his idea of making an animated version of 20,000 Leagues.
Walt had had some experience with live action just prior to 20,000 Leagues in England. And he, I think, being interested in the notion of diversification, hit on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea as a story that had always fascinated him.
In 1953, Walt Disney Studios changed forever. The once quiet animation studio suddenly bustled with the construction of new shops and sound stages needed to accommodate live-action filming. Disney hired 20th Century Fox's veteran film pioneer Ralph Hammerus to handle the ambitious miniature effects photography. And then he continued gathering together an amazing collection of Hollywood talent that included four-time Oscar-nominated cinematographer Franz Planer, Oscar-winning film editor Elmo Williams, and Oscar-winning set decorator Emil Curie, as well as one surprising hire for the most important position on the film.
The story of my getting the job of directing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is, in my view, one of the most bizarre and fantastic episodes that ever happened to me. My father, Max Fleischer, and Walt Disney were great competitors.
Richard Fleischer is the son of Max Fleischer, who did Out of the Inkwell comedies.
So it was a great surprise to me when Walt offered me the job of directing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which would be the Disney Studios' first completely live-action film. And I said, well, Walt, I would love to do this more than anything in the world. This is exactly what I've been looking for, hoping for. But since we have a situation with my father, I wouldn't want him to feel that I was somehow being disloyal to him by working for you. So I phoned my father in New York, and he said, well, you must, by all means, you must take that job. And he said, tell Walt something for me, give him a message. And I said, sure, what is it? He said, you tell Walt he's got great taste in directors. So, happy ending.
So Dick Fleischer was brought in, introduced to me, and I went over the storyboard with him.
Having secured a director, Disney then ran headlong into his first dilemma: how to turn Jules Verne's problematic story into an exciting feature film.
I sat down and read it and was appalled after I'd read the book that there was really no story. It was a series of more or less unconnected episodes. And I had brought on with me a writer, Earl Felton.
Walt believed that the director should cooperate with the writer to developing the story, and he wanted to give him plenty of time.
And we both had the same opinion. How are we going to make a story out of this? Earl Felton came up with really a brilliant suggestion. He said, what we have to do is treat this story as a jailbreak story.
Pick up those two men in the water.
Aye, sir. What about the other one?
Take them all below and confine them to quarters.
These are men imprisoned in a submarine, and their whole thrust is to get out of the sub.
I want to escape.
So do I, with you. And we have to save the professor in spite of himself.
It's interesting, at the beginning of the picture, I was up in my place in the animation building, and Dick Fleischer had an office down the hall a bit. And he and the writer, Earl Felton, were there still writing the story. Walt would come in, and this would often be around 6 o'clock.
Earl spent every evening up here writing new dialogue with Walt. Earl got a little tired of Walt coming in about 6 o'clock and giving them homework to do all evening. So Walt was literally, you know, right up to here in that film.
So between the two, the squid and the octopus, it's the squid who's the real villain.
Well, it was a critical picture for him because it was his first live action piece. No one in this town in Hollywood wanted to take him seriously as a film producer. They looked at the animated features as being cartoons, and the features were, you know, amazing, glorified cartoons, 7 Oscars for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but still he wasn't considered a live action filmmaker. So 20,000 Leagues was a major, major step for him. He paid a great deal of attention to everything that was going on.
In his book, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Mr. Verne himself imagined some pretty weird and wonderful things.
Walt had a way of immersing himself in an idea. He would sort of go into a trance where he wouldn't hear you, and his eyes stare, and his mouth would move, and you would see he was going through some part of that scene. He was acting.
He acted out everything that he was describing.
In his mind, he'd seen the whole thing. He'd seen the space, he'd seen the action. He was part of it.
It was just fascinating to watch what was going on.
And then I had, by that time, designed the Nautilus in my own mind.
It was a kind of Harper-Goffish Victorianism.
Well, Walt wanted me to do sketches, and I thought I didn't have time to make those sketches. So I thought the best way to do was to make a model, which I could show him and he could look at it from any angle that he wanted. So on one Labor Day weekend, as I recall, I whittled this thing out with a draw shave and added all the appurtenances on it and everything. And this was my original scheme for it.
As Disney expanded his vision for 20,000 Leagues, it grew to such a grand scale that it became one of the biggest motion pictures ever attempted in Hollywood, with an initial estimate of $2.7 million.
Which in 1954 was a lot of money.
20,000 Leagues would end up being the most expensive movie ever produced up to that time, even exceeding Gone with the Wind.
So this elaborate film seemed quite extraordinary.
Walt was somebody who had absolute confidence in what he was doing.
He was a great gambler, though. They built stage 3 out here as a stage with a pool, specifically for this movie.
So it was a risk, a big risk.
There were rumors at that time that if that picture hadn't been the success it was, it could have been the end of the Walt Disney Productions.
We were very dependent on the success of every single film that we did.
Adding to Disney's financial pressures were the building of a 150-foot replica of the deck of the Nautilus. Expensive interior sets had to be constructed, as well as a fully functional 70-foot giant squid, and experimental underwater diving gear that required new designs and construction techniques.
The size of the picture and the projected cost of the film was another reason for me to be incredulous, because so much would be riding on my shoulders, including the life and death of the studio.
Walt Disney knew that for his film to be successful, it needed heavyweight superstars in the 4 leading roles. And Roy Disney, who was in charge of handling the money at the studio, knew that they would be expensive additions to the production. The celebrities finally hired were James Mason, Paul Lukas, Peter Lorre, and Kirk Douglas.
I find a picture of the whole cast. That's Paul Lukas, that's me, and Peter Lorre, and of course there's James Mason frowning. I don't know why he's frowning.
We really tried to keep Captain Nemo exactly as he is in the book.
He was a guy that had a lot of wrong done to him, and he really just wanted peace in the world. That's what he really wanted.
See how peaceful it is here. The sea is everything.
As one of Britain's top box office stars, James Mason was just coming to the attention of American audiences by distinguishing himself in such popular films as The Desert Fox, The Prisoner of Zenda, and A Star is Born.
James Mason, wherever he was still Captain Nemo, even at lunch. He never changed. He was playing the part all day long.
I was painting out on the lot at 20th Century, and they were shooting across the road with James Mason. He strolled over and said, "Oh," he said, "you're doing something I would love to be doing. I'd love to have been an artist." I thought, "Oh, cool, let's change. I'll do what you're doing anytime."
Nemo, James Mason, that character, my dad really related to him because James Mason was a very refined fellow, and my dad very much of that same kind of school, if you will, a very refined gentleman. So they connected beautifully. Nemo's character needing all of those accessories to, develop who he really was. And James Mason, such a wonderful actor and so appreciative of that kind of detail, so they connected. There was a lot of appreciation expressed on the set about that.
James Mason was perfect for the part of Captain Nemo. I don't think I could have played that part as well as he played it. On the other hand, I don't think he could have played Ned Land as well.
And he brought depth to the role, but he was a very internal actor. Kirk is a very external actor.
Sought after by every major studio in Hollywood, Kirk Douglas had become a superstar because of his Academy Award nominations for roles in Champion and The Bad and the Beautiful.
I'd never met them, and I had visualized Kirk being a big, brawny, tall, muscular guy, and James Mason being about my size and very withdrawn and short. Well, I got a big shock when I met these guys. Kirk is about my size, very muscular, very strong and dynamic, but he's not a tall man. And James is 6 feet tall, and it's their personalities.
Let every man go to his quarters and remain there.
Why do you take us down with you?
Lock them in their quarters.
Aye, sir. Take them out.
I don't want to die.
People say I get lost in the character.
He's more than just an actor filling his role. He's dynamo. He brings tremendous energy to everything that he's in or gets near. And sometimes he gets a little carried away, too, and he has to be controlled. And he takes direction very well, but he's argumentative.
He would argue with the director that the dialogue was wrong, that a first mate, or whatever he was, would not have that kind of dialogue. He would have another kind of dialogue.
I have been called a difficult actor.
So we'd lose a morning here and there.
If I was, I apologize, but it was always to try to make the picture a little bit better.
It's very exciting to work with him because you know you're going to be challenged all the time.
Of course, I don't think I'm difficult at all. I think I'm such a sweet guy to work with. Here was a scene that I like very much. The scene with the seal.
Give us a kiss.
I think he really liked it.
But while there were plenty of stories about the camaraderie on the set of 20,000 Leagues, not everyone was getting along. Hungarian-born Paul Lukas began his acting career in European films, then rose to stardom in America after winning an Academy Award for Best Actor in Watch on the Rhine.
Paul Lukas was a wonderful dramatic actor, but he was somehow quick to take offense. And anybody said something to him a little sideways or what he thought had a certain inference in it, he would get very angry. And it ended up, he kept threatening to bring lawsuits to everybody on the picture.
Paul Lukas was a very stern, Teutonic gentleman because he played a professor in the picture, so he was the right guy for the part.
I think most of it was the fact that he was growing older and he was having memory problems and he couldn't remember all the lines, and that embarrassed him.
He had been a famous actor in Europe,
He's a stage actor and a wonderful actor, and he would stumble on the lines or lose them. And then he would get mad at me and blame the writer for writing dialogue that he couldn't write. Anybody he could blame other than himself. But I understood that and just tried to keep him happy.
My buddy in the shooting of the picture was really Peter Lorre. I liked him.
One of Hollywood's most respected character actors, Peter Lorre, became an instant sensation when he starred in the German murder mystery M, then went on to perform in a number of American classics throughout the 40s and 50s.
The business of ruffling Peter Lorre's hair by Kirk Douglas, that happened spontaneously on the set. It just happened. We all burst into laughter. And I said, well, use that. Use it. Let's use it again. Let's make it something we keep looking forward to happening on this picture.
You're a very short guy.
Just a lot of fun to work with. He's constantly joking, constantly doing practical jokes.
He was a kind guy and very funny. I loved having him tell me the stories when he worked in Europe.
He just kept the whole set alive and laughing and joyful. We became very, very dear, close friends and remained that way after the picture. As I did with Kirk and James, we all kind of hung together.
With the casting and preliminary designs for the movie completed, it was time to focus on the logistical problems of filming. And it wasn't easy to coordinate, since shooting consumed 3 separate studio lots. At Disney Studios in Burbank, interior Nautilus scenes, the full-size deck Nautilus scenes, and second unit underwater miniature Nautilus scenes were filmed on stages 2 and 3. At Universal International, a Western set was converted to look like San Francisco for the film's opening fight sequence that introduced Kirk Douglas. And work was going on as well over at 20th Century Fox, where miniature effects shots were filmed using the larger 22-foot Nautilus. They were also filming the scene where Nemo gets shot inside Vulcania, as well as the scene where the cannibals rowed out to the Nautilus to attack the ship.
The actual attack was not the guys who were actually rowing the boats. The cannibal sequence was shot on the island of Jamaica at Negril Beach, which is now one of the hottest spots on the island. It's a great resort. But then there was nothing, nobody, no roads even. Went in a Jeep to find the beach, the perfect beach.
So even a tropical paradise had its own set of problems for the production. Tons of movie-making gear had to be shipped and carried to the site.
Then we had to organize the natives, all of these people. I've forgotten how many, but there was at least 100 of the natives that we got to play the roles of the cannibals.
And I like the natives in Jamaica. I like all people that have a certain amount of naivete about them.
They took it in very good humor. There was a lot of fun doing that. There was one funny little bit there. One of the natives, as they ran by, had written on his forehead, "Eat at Joe's," and about 2 or 3 behind him, one of the natives had written, "I ate Joe."
Disney had to employ dozens of craftsmen to fabricate costumes and apply makeup for dozens of extras, as well as create one-of-a-kind props. The most difficult part of working on location, shooting underwater. The difficulties of filming above water proved to be nothing compared to shooting underwater.
The film was made in Nassau, which is in New Providence Island in the Bahamas.
Lifford Key was uniquely situated on the western tip of New Providence Island. It was thought to be the ideal location, and coincidentally proved to be the exact spot where the earlier 1916 version of 20,000 Leagues was filmed. But the location was still quite remote, and more than 20 tons of equipment ranging from a 30-cent screwdriver to 3 specially rigged underwater cameras had to be transported in 212 wooden crates.
The sea is there to defeat you. And it's always an opponent. Never helps very much. It's always trying to do you a damage.
It was decided that experimental one-of-a-kind diving gear had to be designed to meet the specific needs of the story and the production. So the suits were built and then shipped to the Bahamas. But it was equipment that to date had only been tested in a shallow pool at Disney Studios. Would they work in real-world conditions?
It was quite an adventure. I mean, people were scuba diving before that word had been invented. Everything they were doing down there was experimental. It was a pretty amazing operation.
The fantastic Verne-like suits designed by Harper Goff with technical support from diving expert Fred Zendar worked perfectly. And in fact, one of the key elements of the diving helmet was suggested by yet another diver, Al Hansen.
These were built over sponge diving helmets the Japanese used for sponge diving things. That's that part of the helmet. They made this piece to go on it.
Goff's imaginative diving suits were not only visually innovative, but practical.
All of the guys playing the parts of Nemo's men that were marching around in those big diving suits along the bottom were all in these suits, but the apparatus on their back, they were actually using scuba gear inside the suits, even though they looked like diving suits.
The real helmets were quite heavy because they were real metal helmets. No way you could hold these things up out of the water. Now, here's an interesting point with this helmet. If you see these little tubes right here, these are film spools for 35 millimeter and 60 millimeter film when you process it.
The problem was the air supply for these people, because they were all using aqualungs. And the actor divers, the ones that you see in those big suits, were in particular danger because they couldn't swim. They had lead weights in the boots to keep them in the water, not floating away.
20,000 Leagues used many other special effect techniques.
When they got down in the submarine and opened up the big window, we shot some of those scenes two different ways, but most of it was rear projection.
Was a system that was utilized in 20,000 Leagues and a lot of the films that were created during the 50s and 60s for Disney. And rear projection was basically a screen that the camera projected a pre-photographed image. What the crew would do was go and photograph a specific scene, and they would shoot that on a separate day, and that would become the background element. And then what they would do is they would then project that image onto a screen on the set, and the actors would be in front of it, and they would be acting out their scene.
Since Disney was first and foremost an animation studio, it was only natural for the art form to find its way into the picture.
To realize a scene that would be impossible to get any other way.
It's when the sub has sunk to the lowest point that it's ever been, lower than anybody's ever gone before. And I had just read a big article in Life magazine about the weird kind of fish you see down at the bottom at great depths.
The fish and the denizens of this place seem to have their own light, their own illumination.
Aerials with light bulbs kind of things on the end and flashing lights. And I felt that we should see that through the window. And Walt didn't really agree with me. But he ordered the sequence made.
The chief effects animator here at the studio was Josh Medder. And Josh spent probably 6 months animating fish. And they ended up being able to use the fish they shot when they went on location down to the Bahamas. They didn't use any of Josh's fish. And they sat in the studio film library, which had cost a fortune to animate.
The film won the Academy Award for special effects. Particularly the artist that did almost all of the artwork on the mats was Peter Ellenshaw.
Quite often, the top of the scene was a matte painting by Peter Ellenshaw.
Let's talk about, for a moment, about what matte means.
Peter Ellenshaw was amazing in what he did with glass shots. He could shoot a scene that you couldn't just normally go out and photograph. And the foreground could be photographed through the empty part of the glass. So you're kind of doing a trick photograph in camera effect. And all this had to be worked out with the proper perspectives and lenses and angles and whatnot.
Suppose you had a hill that you're photographing, but you need a castle on it, and you don't have time to build the castle. You can paint it. You paint it on the glass. The camera doesn't know that it's only 8 feet away. It looks exactly as though it's on the hill.
There are two places where his work is particularly outstanding. One is a scene at the opening of the film, and there's this wonderful shot of San Francisco Harbor with a forest of mass. And it's a beautiful matte shot. The other one is the inside the volcano. That whole interior, that's completely a painting and a matte shot. And it's a beautiful piece of work, and you'd never know it if you hadn't been told.
For many, the one single standout element of 20,000 Leagues is the Nautilus.
I can't visualize the Nautilus without first thinking of Harper Goff's design of the Nautilus.
The exterior of the submarine was put together and designed by Harper Goff.
One of the prime points made by Verne in the original story was that most of the people in the world that had seen it described it as a monster, as a sea monster. The two most awesome sea creatures that I had ever seen were the shark and the alligator. The alligator, his ability to lie almost completely submerged, but his eyes are above water, seeing everything, and the menacing of the quietness of it, and the roughness of the skin and all. And then the shark, with its dorsal fin, which you see is a warning. It's like the rattle on a rattlesnake. And so I kind of combined the two.
I'll tell you about Harper Goff, shall I? Because he had a great influence on the film. He had extraordinary ability to put himself back in Victorian times, or even further back. And he was the one who designed the submarine from the ground up.
It's wonderful, wonderfully realized Victorian design that he originated.
It's not the bullet-shaped submarine we had already come to see by that time. And therefore, it directly evokes the kind of sensation of the 19th century. And it was sort of, quote, atomic-powered.
It's the first nuclear-powered submarine launched, I believe, in 1958 or 59. Was called the Nautilus because of the Disney film, not the Jules Verne novel.
I believe it was Walt Disney who came up with the idea of nuclear energy as the power source for the Nautilus submarine. And even for the time that we were making the film, it was a very advanced idea.
And no one had ever seen such a thing. Another friend and myself found some plastic salad bowls that we fitted into a panel with rivets and so forth. We added, we fit these salad bowls and then put various color wheels behind them. We conjured up our idea of a atomic furnace, and somehow it seemed to satisfy everybody. But it was made out of salad bowls that we picked up at the dime store.
Goff's concept designs for the interior of the Nautilus were based on the battleship Oregon, built in the 1890s. But while the designs were antiquated, the sets themselves were constructed of a new, state-of-the-art material, fiberglass.
Using fiberglass for sets was not the common practice, and indeed the Nautilus interior, all that shell, that was all created out of fiberglass. So it was a very unique thing to be working with. It created another set of problems for the guys on the set decorating crew, because when you've got this thin skin, you don't have the substance of a piece of wood or what have you to drill into and mount. So they had to go through quite a bit of extra effort to secure things and give it all that kind of finished feel.
The set was designed so that you could see the entire set almost in every shot. The walls and the floor and the ceiling. We wanted that to give us a feeling of claustrophobia. It's always feel that you are enclosed in that submarine. Jailbreak idea again. But the sets were designed for that, and they were beautifully designed and beautifully created.
Unfortunately, because of their design, the interior sets proved to be almost impossible to light for cinematographer Franz Planer.
Because there's no place to hide lights. So every piece of furniture in that set had a light hidden in it somewhere that was lighting the actors. Because we were using CinemaScope. We were the second picture to be made in CinemaScope. And so we had nothing to fall back on to see how somebody else did certain things. And beside that, we only had one lens to shoot the whole picture with, because they just hadn't manufactured enough lenses by that time. It's very early on in CinemaScope. But it just took forever to get each setup. We only made 2 or 3 setups a day.
Besides having difficulty with the lighting, Franz Planer faced yet another challenge from set designer Emil Curie.
The cinematographer came onto the set, and when he saw the red upholstery, and he had already shot a camera test with Nemo wearing the red jacket, he got very concerned about a contrast in reds and insisted that my father reupholster the furniture into some other color. Well, my dad was a wonderful man to work with and very much a team player and a very cooperative person, but he also believed very strongly in his vision or his view of things, and he refused to do that, which of course caused Walt Disney to come to the set and ask the question, what is the problem here? So my dad explained to him that the combination of color of the different reds was going to be extraordinary, and that's really what his design was. So Walt ordered that there be a camera test shot of the set with all of these things as they were laid out. And ultimately, they saw it in the projection room, and it was extraordinary. It was beautiful. The saturation of those reds, those colors are just so magnificent.
Gough's designs combined futuristic piston-driven mechanisms with 19th century culture, so that Captain Nemo could be surrounded by rich, tasteful furnishings. Gough once noted that nothing looks more attractive than a combination of rough iron and elegant luxury.
Harper was very influential conceptually. He had such a wonderful visual sense, and his visualizations of that essential look of the Nautilus were very, very important to the show. And my father was always very particular about every detail. In Nemo's Salon, every one of those books, they were not just randomly picked off of the shelves of some prop house where you send a prop man down and say, get me 10 yards of books. They were all particular to the era, you know, those beautifully bound leather books that they had in those days so that the actors could work with the props. Walt was a fanatic for research, and my father did the same thing. He went to San Pedro. He went into those areas where you would find things related to ships. And he bought all kinds of wonderful, wonderful things, those instruments and valves and levers and all of those things which are very tactile. They're very important to the actors to get their hands on them, to have things that have that patina of age, that reality, the detail. Again, coming back to that issue of detail, you can't guess at it. You have to know. There has to be reasons why things are there. The organ, which was such a centerpiece in that set, he actually purchased for $50 from an ad that he saw in the San Fernando Valley, and it was an old electric theater organ, and he went to see it. And they had no idea who he was or what he was buying it for, but here was this entire keyboard, this organ, including the stops, which was very unusual to find all of that functioning. It wasn't playable, but it all functioned. The keys moved and the stops pulled and closed. He had the pipes cast in plaster and gold leafed and did all that ornate Rococo work to the framework at the top of the organ. And it was just this marvelous centerpiece, which for a mere $50 had been purchased.
At the start of the production, the sets for 20,000 Leagues were the primary financial concern for Disney and his brother Roy. But the cost of the sets, as well as all other production problems, were eclipsed by one scene in the film, a nightmare sequence that to this day remains legendary in Hollywood.
The most difficult, maybe the most famous sequence in the picture is the battle with the giant squid.
They built stage 3 out here as a stage with a pool specifically for this movie in order to stage a few of the submarine scenes, but most specifically the fight with the giant squid.
With depths ranging from 3 to 18 feet, the tank would house the full-size deck of the Nautilus and the attacking giant squid, and would also be used for some of the film's numerous underwater miniature shots. Construction of the new stage added $300,000 to the steadily rising costs of the production, but that was just the beginning of a long string of crushing expenses.
It started out to be an absolute total disaster in every sense of the word.
In the script, it's described in one simple sentence, and screenwriter Earl Felton could never have known the amount of aggravation, money, and frustration that was going to be caused by that one brief description.
I reckoned it would be very dramatic if, and I was doing sketches on the film quite a lot, that if we did a red, deep red sky and the squid comes out of the water, it would be a wonderful effect. Well, they tried it. They put on a kind of washy-washy sky, and it looked ridiculous.
The light was very rich and pink and sort of peaceful. And it struck a number of us immediately that it didn't look like the setting for a serious struggle.
On March the 10th, 1954, director Richard Fleischer and cinematographer Franz Planer enthusiastically began shooting the squid scene. But it soon became obvious to everyone that it was going to be a frighteningly massive case of special effects that would never work, and in fact were capable of sinking the entire movie. The Sunset Squid Fight, as it was called, became every producer's nightmare.
The squid was practically worthless. The squid that had been built in the studio was a great big blob of something, I don't know what. It had all the tentacles, but the tentacles were held up by very heavy cable, which you couldn't avoid seeing, and operated from up in the flies by puppeteers, I guess you'd call them.
There were no clouds to hide the wires as the wires moved the squid's arms and stuff.
The cables would break, or great hunks of the material would come apart, come off, and the inside was stuffed with kapok, and it was absorbing the water, so it got heavier and heavier, and getting less and less mobile, and it was just impossible. So I'm trying to shoot this thing, and I'm sick to my stomach looking at it because I know it's not working.
And I wasn't there at the time, but everybody knew what happened. They took it in and ran it for Walt, and the squid just simply looked fake.
And Walt Disney shows up. He said, I just saw your dailies. And he said, I've been watching what you're doing here. He said, you're making a Keystone comedy cops movie. This is terrible. I said, well, don't tell me about it. I know what it is, and I explained the situation. And he understood that right away. He could see what was happening.
And I saw some of the stuff later, and Lord knows, it looked awful fake.
Disney halted the shooting on March the 17th.
He said, start a dramatic sequence and leave the squid sequence alone. He said, I'll get together with my geniuses at Disneyland, and we'll come up with a squid that will do something for you. It'll be much better than this.
He knew that if the problem wasn't solved, the entire film would be a failure.
My writer, Earl Felton, had seen the dailies too. And I said, you know, Earl, what are we going to do with this thing? It doesn't work, even if we get a good squid. He said, well, look, everything's wrong with this sequence. This should be a sequence that takes place at night in a violent storm with lightning and thunder and wind, tremendous wind. waves smashing everything. So it becomes not just a fight against the squid, but a fight against nature as well. You'll only see the squid really in flashes of lightning, and you won't see any flaws that it may have. So I kissed his hand and ran out to find Walt. And I ran right into Walt on the studio street. And I said, Walt, this is the new concept for the squid fight. And he listened and he said, you're absolutely right. He didn't hesitate a minute. That's the way we'll do it. And you tell Earl to write that sequence.
The trouble was with the Storm, it was horribly expensive.
And everybody said, oh my God, that'll cost twice as much as you've already spent and not going to use. And he said, I don't care, we've got to do it.
It cost an additional $250,000, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but in 1954, that was a lot to add to the budget.
The guy was, he wasn't stingy that way. He wanted this film to be the best it could, and it turned out being the very best it could.
The two squid fights were written and conceived differently, with action sequences as well as physical settings that bore little resemblance to one another. Also, the two squids themselves were drastically different, not only in their operation, but also in their outward appearance and coloring.
And Chris Mueller actually sculpted that big squid, which was pretty an amazing feat in itself, because it was full size. I mean, it's the biggest squid anybody's ever seen.
Mueller redesigned the shape of the giant squid so that its 8 tentacles, now tapered at the end to make them more like snakes, could stretch out to twice their length. Meanwhile, the problems with manipulating the tentacles were solved by mechanical effects expert Bob Matty.
They came up with a way of making a spring device. It looked like a spring, and the latex was actually put on that. And so it was light as a feather, and you could get all this fluid movement that way. And that's why that thing looked totally realistic in the movie. It was just incredible.
Mueller added a brow ridge to give the squid a menacing look, as well as shortened the squid's normal elongated shape to something more bulbous. Now weighing in at almost 2 tons, the new squid was fully operational, thanks to Bob Matty. But it took a crew of 28 men to bring it to life. Every arm was full length, attached to the squid's body and fully functional, so that they writhed realistically.
They found a way to articulate the squid by using vacuum hoses in the arms to allow the arms to curl when inflated and to go straight when deflated. So it created the illusion of actual movement.
Here's this gigantic squid, tentacles suspended by these cables and what have you, and this water and the Nautilus, and they were in the throes of doing that battle scene. And I remember standing, watching that, wrapped up in raincoats and what have you, because the amount of water that was getting thrown around in that set with those huge stage fans and all the water from the storm and what have you, it was an amazing thing to witness as a young kid. It would have been amazing as an adult to stand there and witness that.
When you have a movie that is physical, to me it's like a vacation. When you have an emotional scene, it's very much more tiring than a physical scene if you're in reasonable condition.
Cost overruns reached critical mass just 4 weeks after Fleischer finished photography on the second squid fight.
So much so that, and this is like halfway through the schedule, so much so that we were about to run out of money, and that would close down the picture and maybe close the studio. And it was the added cost was brought on by this redoing the sequence and trying to do it the proper way.
Production overages on the film were now eating into money to be used in constructing Disneyland. Walt Disney needed more money in a hurry.
They had to get in the bankers. They were asked them to supply money to finish the picture, and the bankers wanted to see what had been shot up to date. And that was a big day for us. I was working on the set, waiting to hear word whether we were going to come back to work the next day or shut down that night. It was really that close. Word got back to me. They loved it, and they're giving him $1.5 million to finish the picture. That's our squid story. It was a real hair-raiser, a movie in itself.
20,000 Leagues started out being one of the most costly films ever produced by an American studio.
The picture took 2 years to make.
By the time it was completed, its budget overruns made it the most expensive motion picture ever made up until that time.
There was a big advertising and promotional campaign, and as a result, the interest in this film, even before it opened, was considerable.
By the time it reached movie theaters, the expense of prints and the biggest advertising campaign Hollywood had ever seen drove the cost of the film closer to $9 million, and was considered by most in Hollywood to be one of Walt Disney's biggest gambles.
20,000 Leagues at that time was considered, we were a small studio, and we were making a film that other people could do so much better and everything. Well, they reckoned without Walt Disney.